So I grew up in Puerto Rico, but all my family was Dominican. And um, at least when I was growing up, the way in which people in Puerto Rico would sort of like think of Dominicans or see Dominicans is in many ways the way in which some people from the United States look at Mexicans. That in a lot of ways the interaction is the exact same. Um, and so one of the more particular things about sort of growing up in this um, middle ground was that people would come and they would ask me, "Oh, well, are you Puerto Rican or are you Dominican?" And I would be like, "Oh, I guess I'm Puerto Rican because I was born here." And then they would be like, "No, but if your family is Dominican, then you can be Puerto Rican even if you were born here." And I'd be like, "Oh, okay, I guess that's how it works." And then someone else would come by and they'd be like, "So, where are you from?" And I'd be like, "Oh, I'm Dominican because my parents are Dominican." And then they'd be like, "Well, where were you born?" And I'd be like, fuck. I was born here. And then, as you might imagine, they'd be like, "Oh, then you're Puerto Rican because you're from where you were born." And so, constantly throughout my life until the time that I moved out of Puerto Rico, people would constantly ask me that question, or they would not ask the question, but they would be perplexed by almost like the flip side of that question, in the sense that sometimes I would mention to people that I was Dominican, or it would be something that they would just kind of like find out, and they would be like, "Wait, but you are white. How are you white but also Dominican?" And in fact, sometimes people wouldn't even actually say it, but you could like see it on their eyes, like the confusion that would spark their eyes the moment that they would know that I was Dominican. Uh, it happened so much that it was very evident what was going kind of like through their mind and the confusion. Not to mention the fact that my mom is white and then my father is black. So if the first thing did not confuse the hell out of him, for some reason the second one did. Um, and so um, this made me realize very early on that all of these distinctions between countries and between nationalities and between race and all these things are fairy tales, are absolute made believe. That, like I mentioned at the start, people asking me where I was from, like two different people would have completely different definitions of what it was that defined a Puerto Rican and what it was that didn't. People from the same country, and what made me realize, these are not things that are divinely defined. These are not things, these are not name plates that we carry throughout our lives that God gave us and that no one can refute or challenge or change. That these are things that at some point during our lives we learn or absorb from the world what the definition was, how we were supposed to define them, how what kind of meaning those things were supposed to have. That um, I sincerely feel like this is not sort of like our nature. Like kids are not born seeing a distinction between people of different colors or different countries. It is something that we absorb throughout our lives. Now, I think the sort of like insidious part of all this is that I think it is something that it's like a virus, and I think we're spreading it almost by accident. That sure, there are spaces in which it seems like people are doing it on purpose, in which people are trying to create some racial disparity or some disparity between people. But I think most of the time, those disparities are being built by accident. That in the same way that a parent might tell a girl, oh, boys are just mean, or boys or do these things in a certain way. Boys are supposed to be tough. We are also saying the reverse. That that some of the more particular things of the way in which our language works is that our language in many ways works through contrast. That the way in which we make sense of things is by making sense of the reverse of them. So when someone goes and says, oh, boys are supposed to be tough, then we're also saying the reverse. If someone's specifying that it's boys that are tough, then maybe what they're also implying is that girls are supposed to not be. And so I think examples like this is how all these almost like chasms in that people build in between each other because of minute differences that they may have are coming from ideas that we experienced at some point in our lives, and we never really questioned them, and then they became part of our daily perception of the world, part of the way that we looked at certain groups of people. That when someone went and said, hey, this other group of people is privileged, and they're going to be going around gunning for you. They're going to be going around from their privileged position trying to mess you up, trying to not help you move forward and all these things. We're also saying the reverse. We're also saying you are not privileged, and the world is going to be out there kind of like gunning for you. And I think oftentimes we might be doing this from like with the best of intentions, that we might be trying to protect people or protect kids, that help them understand what the world is like. But I think at the same time, we're to some degree setting them up for failure. We're convincing human beings that the majority of other human beings of a particular description that fit a particular idea or a particular definition are people that are all kind of like in on the game of like not helping them out or not being human beings. And so it creates this like two-sided disparity in which, with just one argument to one person, both sides are being put at odds with each other. And it again, it's all make-believe. It's all ideas that we have at some point experienced, but we never challenged, and we never considered challenging them because there was some logic to them, that there was some logic because it came from people that we trusted. It came from people that seemed to know what they were talking about. It came from people who seemed to have a good grasp on how the world truly works. But when you realize that no one really knows what the heck is going on, but then we are absolutely certain that somehow we don't know what's going on. But even though we don't know, we're still certain that there's a particular group of people that in which all of them are in this game against us. Then I guess what I wonder, is what kind of game are we playing? Like, really, what's the end game? What's the goal? What are we trying to do in teaching people divisions, teaching people ways in which they can further disconnect with the people around them, as opposed to playing a game in which we're teaching people all the ways in which we are in this together, all the ways in which we are sort of navigating through this journey in the same boat, that if the boat sinks, it sort of sinks for all of us. But if the boat rises, it rises for all of us. That maybe one of the smallest ways in which we can create a very significant change in the way in which we look at ourselves, and the way in which we look at the people around us, in the way in which we think of other people's intentions, is simply by changing the things that we're putting our attention on. That if we're putting our attention on people from a certain group that we have defined, for putting the attention on the people from that group that maybe didn't treat us the way that we expected to be treated, we're not putting the attention on the people from that group that have treated us in the way that we expected to be treated. That instead of looking at the people from that group who are out there doing things that we consider good, we have put ourselves in a position in which we almost cannot fathom not looking at the people from that group who are out there doing harm. And so with that, I feel like the change from one to the other is a very minute one. I think really the issue is noticing that is something that's going on, and then taking sort of like conscious action, or a conscious, building a sort of like conscious habit to sort of like work that through. And I think eventually you just get the momentum going enough in which you do realize that there's a lot of people out there who actually want to help out, and that even the people who sometimes don't treat us in the way that we expect, that they're not almost like doing it on purpose. It's not like they're mischievously planning on doing harm, but that they made a decision that seemed like the right decision, and then it played out in a way that was not immediately favorable for us, and maybe even for them without them knowing.